Yeah, clear.
Oh, right. So I hope everyone's got a copy of the PowerPoint. So my plan is to go through these slides on the PowerPoint and make the arguments.
You can share the screen. So I've given you permission to do that.
Of course.
Yeah.
Little green box in the
Yep. I'm trying to get back onto it. They should just be called old people who don't know how to use computers. Can you see the screen?
No, it's not on as yet.
Not on as yet. Hold on, please. Look, I'm going to have to
Well,
come
if
back
you
into
email
it.
if you email it to me, then I can put it up.
Okay. In the meantime, I'll try. I'll email it to Valerie because I don't have your number, Ignatius.
Okay, well, email it to Valerie and we're going to.
Okay, I think she already has it.
Well, Valerie, please send me
Sorry, what was that?
the PowerPoint from Simon.
I don't see it.
No, but I sent it to you, Valerie. Oh, hold on, share. Okay. I think I've got it here. Right, so I think I've got it here. Okay,
Yeah, right.
got it.
We're there. And
Okay.
now you just got to go to your slideshow.
Okay. This is a very stressful business, I can tell you. It's okay. Anyway, so we're here. So the first slide, what I want to do is to say that we're talking about climate change adaptation, and really the interventions, institutional, capital investment, law, everything else are part of a wider planning process. So climate change is really one aspect of a more standard planning, programming, and budgetary procedures for any state, because it has to, whatever actions are taken, have to be integrated into the budget process. So basically, the Caribbean island states have already developed national resilience development strategies, mostly, I think, and these integrate concerns regarding environmental protection, social development, and economic development. So we're not dealing with something that's to do with ecology on its own or the environment on its own. It's how does climate change relate to the broader national planning objectives? And what I want to say here is that over the years, what's happened is that these plans are related to the Sustainable Development Goals. So Valerie has asked me if I will be less specific and more general about what is happening in different countries. So I will do that. I hope you will find it useful. I'd like to say my first job in my life was the Indus Basin Scheme, which had two of the biggest earth dams in the world. That's in Pakistan. And what happened there was that when I started on that job, a World Bank team said, if we don't have nationalization of land, nothing will change. That didn't happen because many Pakistanis went abroad to work, so they came back with different ideas. So, you know, issues of water management, climate change, national development, these are common everywhere. But I'd like, please, to start with a experience I have in the Indian Ocean. So the Mauritius strategy for the small island development states started off with 20 thematic issues, which we will go through a bit later, that affect these small states more than the larger states. And the adaptation for these is complex and difficult. In the Caribbean, there are 24 regional coordinating mechanisms, CARICOM, etc. This is not what you find in the Indian Ocean or in the Pacific Ocean, where there's very little cooperation at all. The problems for the Eastern and Southern Africa Indian Ocean program is that the states are obviously very isolated. They have very little cooperation. They're very susceptible to national disasters, etc., etc. So the Indian Ocean program, I was asked to do an evaluation of this program. This was, 12 years ago. So I just quickly run through what this program was about. It had a European Commission technical assistance program of 10 million euros, that's 60 professionals from all over the region. The Kuwait Bank was providing 90 million euros of capital investment programming. And these islands include Mauritius, Seychelles, etc., etc. These are completely different islands, completely different. And of the 20 thematic issues that the original UN strategy came up with, they came up with 4 flagships, because you cannot plan with 20 strategies. And the 4 were basically for social learning. The whole program was about social learning so that people would learn by doing it. Is about coral reefs. They were going to dump rubber tires in the sea. They wanted to develop a disaster insurance scheme so different countries can help each other if they go really wrong. Thirdly, support for high-level political strategy. Now, this is really where the issues were and the problems lie. And they wanted to operationalize this political strategy for this investment program, which would then use the 90 million. However, I started in the Mauritius and we went to the Seychelles. What happened with the group in the Mauritius, the support program there with the professionals? They couldn't agree what a strategy was. So they were fighting or arguing about strategy. They couldn't agree. So 24 people were sent across to Norway to learn systems theory on the assumption that systems theory would allow them to come up with a strategy. When they came back, there was still no agreement about which strategy is the most important, how to do it. And so this is a first thing I'd like to say is that systems theory does not allow you to make strategy. Strategy is coming from the Greek, and it comes from the Greek term strategios, decision makers. Strategy, therefore, is about the decision makers. And I want to stress this, because if you don't have these decision makers on board in an integrated way, you're not going to get anything to happen. So 24 people went to Bergen. They came back. They couldn't agree. And on the traveling around these islands, I went to the first island I went to was the Seychelles. And on the right-hand side, you'll see a picture of the Seychelles. It's a high-level tourist destination. Earlier, 300 years ago, it was used for pirates. The ships going around South Africa from Europe to India were prey to the pirate ships. So this Seychelles actually was a pirate place. And you can see a gravestone from a pirate. So when I got to Seychelles, I asked and my job is to interview the deputy ministers of finance. I said, so how do you make decisions? It's obvious. We use the planning, programming, and budgetary process. So in a sense, climate change adaptation is no different to any other form of investment. So I'll quickly run through these things, because I've wasted a bit of time trying to log in. So if you have different projects, some are better than others. So how do you assess which are goods and which are bad? And the methodology which is used everywhere is economic appraisal, using some form of cost-benefit analysis. And you then optimize your projects. So you hope you can get the best ones. And so it's what is known as welfare economics, dating back to the 19th century. And it has a series of steps for cost-benefit analysis. Is 4 steps. You first of all identify what actions you want. Secondly, you quantify the actions with numbers. Thirdly, you price these actions. And then fourthly, you change the pricing of the actions into shadow prices to reflect labour and capital policy. This is standard for all capital investment projects. The second methodology is what they call cost-effective analysis, which is what most governments use. You assume the benefits are the same and you design to minimize costs. This is what all engineers do, whether they are understanding it or not, but that's actually what happens. Then you compare your costs and benefits. This is standard stuff in terms of net present value, financial internal rate of return, etc. However, cost-benefit analysis requires all costs and benefits to be monetized. And this is a problem because most cost-benefit analysis you'll see is put into projects and you end up with looking at the financial and economic benefits. And it's very difficult then to say, well, what do you do about non-monetized issues such as social benefits, gender equality, environmental damage, all the things that actually matter. So this was a big failing of the cost-benefit analysis model. I would point out that cost-benefit analysis or using this methodology for capital investment comes from a man called W.W. Rostow. He set up the methodology for this in 1956. And this methodology is being used by all the development banks. I mean, it's a pretty standard thing. The problem is it doesn't really take account of social and environmental factors. And if you look at the book that he wrote, it's called Stages of Economic Growth. And underneath it says a subtitle, A Non-Communist Manifesto. So in 1950s, when he wrote the book, at that time there was a Cold War, and you had the Eastern Bloc, Russia, India, going for national 5-year plans. And they really didn't go project by project. They said, right, we want to feed people. This is what we will do. We need railways to move transport. This is what we will do. And then they use cost-effective analysis. So the whole business of cost-benefit analysis, which the World Bank now has rode back on, is only in the last 50, 60 years. So stages of project preparation, I'm sure everyone knows this. The stages are a concept note at the top, rapid appraisal report, pre-feasibility, and feasibility studies. Now, these require increasing amounts of effort. A feasibility study is likely to cost 3 to 5% of capital investment. And once it gets to that stage, it's very difficult to stop projects. So you have to, early on, decide, is this really what we want? Do we really want to do this? So this is a fairly standard thing. Concept note, 1 or 2 pages. It's qualitative goals, visiting peoples, maybe 1 month to do it. But as a feasibility study, a full feasibility study is likely to take 6 months or more. So this absolutely applies to climate change adaptation projects, because some of those are really expensive and some are quite cheap. So how do you choose one or the other? Just give you an example here about identification. This is from a job I did 2 years ago in Guyana. They had a Water Act 2002, which had never been implemented. So they asked me and the team if we would divide or rewrite the law so that the National Water Resource Management body could be set up, because they were the ones who had to make big decisions. Do you put money into irrigation, into drainage, into hydroelectric schemes and such like? So I've just given you a picture here of the institutional structure of Guyana. And the purpose was to set up a water resource management entity again. Now that is basically comes under the regulation of a national planning body, Water Resource Council, Ministry of Finance and Planning. So these 3 bodies would be overseeing this entity. And the entity would then make decisions about how the country should run, how the monies should be invested, what are the criteria for this. Now, to get some consensus on this, because the issues are very complicated, we ran a series of national workshops and asked the question, what helps and what hinders the national investment programming? And interesting thing about this was that these were different groups. We had different stakeholders and different government groups asking that question. They came up with, by voting on it at the end, that the big problem, what hinders the formation of this National Water Council, is lack of studies, lack of research, inadequate sector legislation. These were the big scores. So those things they could do. So what was surprising out of this meeting was that there was a very good idea amongst the people in Guyana what their problems were. There was no question of that they didn't understand what they needed to do. So this methodology of participative decision-making, I would recommend it to everybody. I've used it on all of my jobs. It basically allows a lot of the political business to be dealt with without any conflict. As an example, I did one of these in Syria years ago, and we were looking at the law for municipal development for Syria. So all the Syrians, they all said from the municipalities, yeah, we know what to do. They had a workshop and they voted on what they should do. Basically, in Syria, that the executive, legislature, and judiciary were all under the control of the Alawites regime. And the security officer from the Alawites was watching this meeting, and he was trying to spot who was actually saying something that went against the interests of the Alawites. But this whole methodology allowed people to make their comments. They all said we need to have separate legislation. So I'm just saying that even in really tricky places like such as Syria, which is now descended into catastrophic civil war, these things work. This then was the conclusion of our paper. We had a green paper that the Water Resources Authority should come under a national water resources body. There were 30 stakeholders, gold miners, farmers, fishers. And on the supply side, the government bodies, there were 20 government bodies. So how on earth do you get these 50 different groups to agree with what to do? They have to coordinate policy, planning, allocate money, licensing, how do you do that? That is the issue if you want to have a climate change adaptation policy which will work. So just quickly running through these global policies. We had the Paris Agreement, the two words, mitigate and adaptation. Mitigate, reduce the quality of emissions. But these are by the developed economies. There's no way that the mitigation of pollution of greenhouse gases in the Caribbean will make a scrap of difference. The big thing is the big ones, Europe, America, China, India. Adaptation is really what we're talking about, is how do you increase resilience? So for the Caribbean, as Ignatius said, I've worked in Dominica extensively, Trinidad and Tobago, Guyana, Grenada, and I know the situation in the Caribbean very well. There's a lot of very useful work being done. Basically, people agree that the Caribbean is what they call ground zero for climate change, for all those different reasons given below. Sea level rises. Dominica was devastated by Hurricane Arica 7 years ago. And this problem is going to intensify for the different islands because it's wide open to the hurricane belt, except Guyana, which is quite lucky. This is Dominica. In Hurricane Arica, they lost 90% of the roofs. barriers and problems go from limited governance arrangements, limited financial resources, human blah, 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 and legal systems which aren't really suited for or suited for it. I'd just like to say here that the job I did last year was we used the ideas of OECD, which talked about climate governance, climate governance, and they talked about mind the gap, bridge the gap. Now, these are just words, because minding the gap, yes, you know where there's problems in governance, but how do you bridge the gap? What will it look like? And what I found, so on the OECD one, is they have a very restricted repertoire of what countries can do, which to me was very surprising why they would do that. So all I'm saying is when you're doing this work, it's necessary to think critically and don't accept what other people say, including what I have to say. So I then quickly run through the Dominica case. I worked in Dominica in 2008. We came up with a green paper for the reform of the water sector there. I worked back again in 2019, and we looked at how this thing should change. So Dominica has a very broad framework and guidelines. A lot of effort has been done. Detailed plans and targets, and their national resilience development strategy has a huge spectrum with detailed action plans and targets, as you can see at the bottom. Economic diversification, each one is described and an action plan for them. So this is a very good bit of work. Then going back to the climate policy on national resilience development strategy, if you have your proposed climate policy strategies, on the right-hand side, you have these 20 thematic areas. What you want to do is which of these things on the right-hand side are the critical ones. Economic ones are private investments, economic performance, employment, fiscal sustainability. The social aspects are to reduce poverty, reduce inequality, improve health, preserve cultural heritage, and also GESI, gender equality and social inclusion. So each of those things on the right-hand side you need to include in your climate policy strategy. So, IPF, Infrastructure Prioritization Framework. The World Bank decided 8 years ago that cost-benefit analysis ignored social and economic. So how do you then include social and environmental issues into your financial and economic? How do you balance those two? What they did is come up with a methodology which we adopted for Dominica. And that basically said that social and environmental issues are worth 50% of the value of a project, and financial and economic issues are worth 50% also. Whereas at the moment, financial and economic values are rated at 100%. And then social and environmental issues are considered an externality or secondary considerations. Using a modified form of cost-benefit analysis, you can then check out these two different aspects, social, environmental, financial, economic, and then rank your projects, sensitivity. So it's basically the same thing, but it's much broader. And the purpose of it is so that you don't have people making their own off-the-cuff decisions. Someone has to decide. It has to be transparent and reproducible so you can argue the case when you're making your budgets. And the way this works is what they call a multi-criteria decision analysis. Is a formal and non-discretionary approach, which allows people with different goals to make judgments based on their different understandings of values. What it means is that the way that their values are valued by them is given fair understanding and is made open. Now, this happens in all budgetary meetings. Every state, every government making decisions, they will do this, although they may not put it into numbers. If it is put into numbers, then it can be open and a consensus-based. And this is absolutely necessary for climate change adaptation. And these are the reasons down below. You formally structure the analysis, give trade-offs, and incorporate quantitative and qualitative impacts. So the MCDA methodology is being used throughout the world in all cities, all governments. It just means that for climate change, it's specifically tailored. Now, the World Caribbean Bank has done a lot of work on this, reducing poverty and transforming lives through sustainable, resilient, and inclusive development. This is their report. The strategies to build resilience are the social resilience, economic resilience, and environmental resilience. Social resilience means that people who are poor are not allowed or are supported. Economic resilience means that when there are shocks, international problems with trade, that they don't go under. And environmental resilience, that means they look after the environment. So you can see there underneath these, in the middle of the circle, these different sectors that go under these different resilience strategies. The first one is social resilience, education, agriculture, water, sanitation, and such like. It's just a more formal way of putting it all together. So, one example, building social resilience, the Caribbean Development Bank, using the Sustainable Development Planning for 2020 to 24. The areas of intervention, you can see education, agriculture, community, water and sanitation, youth, and relate that to the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, this may seem very clumsy and convoluted, but the way it works is that you have a formal way of scoring, and I'll explain that now. So they have the National Resilience Development Strategy for 2030 for the water sector projects. Now, they have indicators, social and environment on the left-hand side, and financial and economic. Now, the policy decision criteria to be used in the infrastructure prioritization analysis are given there below. Water, 20 hours a day, gender responsive, waterborne sewage, blah, blah, blah. And below that, you have financial economic, efficiency investment, OPEX, costs, high tourist, economic growth. So these are the policy decision criteria which come directly from the government's national policy strategy. Then we have, if you look at it, there are two ways to go at it. Firstly, the policy decision criteria for sub-projects. This is determined by the stakeholders. So you might want 50% of value of projects to go through new connections and 10% for something else. And then whoever's looking at the projects one by one will say, well, does this project actually have an impact? And based upon multiplication of those two, you can get you get a summary of numbers of whether this project is likely to be a good one or a bad one. An example, achievement goals, population with uninterrupted water supply, 50%, 20% extra coverage, socially inclusive communication planning. So these score high. And you can see their efficiency of investment allocation. These are standard ones you get out of any economic analysis. So each of these score 100%, or rather, let's say 50-50. You could argue, why is it 50-50? Well, I have it 100-100 here. Why is it like this? Why should social and environmental issues, why should they be scored lower? Well, you can. You can do it through sensitivity testing, but once you go through this process, what actually comes out is much more simple, that it becomes obvious what you have to do. Now, the impact achievement as determined by the project design team. Again, the top line, increase in resilience of the sub-project system, impact weight 75%. So for one project, they said, yes, this project is a good one. For the financial and economic, the achievement on this project was the lowest per capita cost for projects, again, high. So these weren't bad projects. This was done for every project. So if you have a climate change adaptation action plan, your action plan will be filled up with projects, some which you can, for capital investment, you can do this quite quickly, even at pre-feasibility study level, and you can get a good idea of which ones are likely to be good ones. Now, this process is what we all do anyway. I mean, any good engineer will do this anyway, but what it does do is put numbers on paper so that there's no fighting over should it be A or B, and it just makes it transparent. Then you can look at these achievement scores and see where they lie. The left-hand side is the financial economic, and the bottom line is social environmental. And these different scores for these different projects, you can see the ones in the top right-hand segment are the ones that you go for first. And some of the other ones at the bottom, you probably wouldn't. And this actually makes visual what you have qualitatively and quantitatively derived from your projects. I would like to say here that last year I joined with a Danish economist, and we submitted a proposal to the Water Resources Foundation in the US. In the US, you have 12 major cities. They're all developing climate change adaptation policies, but the problem is in the states that half of the states are Republican and they don't believe in climate change. And the Environmental Protection Agency has 1,000 offices, 20,000 staff, and people wouldn't listen to them. So they wanted to do it themselves. So my colleague and I said, let us use this model and see what happens in your cities. And there's a lot of interest in that, but unfortunately we didn't win. So to conclude, how to prioritize our actions. We're basically talking about actions for infrastructure investment. This prioritization has to balance environmental protection, gender equity, social inclusion, and economic development. There is no common measure for any of these. It has to be judgment. Secondly, systems theory does not make policy, so you can't expect that it can. Thirdly, traditional CBA analysis is okay, but not okay for environmental or GESI decisions. Fourthly, infrastructure prioritization frameworks provide a framework for stakeholders to make their values transparent and assess the impact. So what we're talking about is really making a network which allows a consensus on what is to be done next. And as I said, it's not easy in any country because everyone has their own ideas. And finally, prioritization is a part of the programming and budgetary process. I've missed a slide by mistake, which I shall come back to. And this shows the national budgetary process. On the left-hand side, you will see the standard national budgetary framework from macro framework, capital investment, recurrent expenditures. And on the right-hand side, you have the new projects coming in, and they enter into your national budgetary process. So whatever projects are coming up, you just feed in what is likely to happen into there, and you end up with your annual budget. Normally, you can't put in more projects than there is money for them. But if you screen them and worked out which ones you want, then it makes the process much more open. So that's basically what I wanted to say. I'm really sorry about this delays. This is a farmhouse from the Po Valley last year in Italy. went underwater. Okay, Ignatius, thank you.
Yeah, right. Thank you, Simon. I think you have done exceedingly well to catch up for some of the delay that we had at the start. And I trust that the participants have found this as interesting as I have. I now will open up the floor for any questions or observations that the participants may have at this time. Of course, we in the Caribbean, as it relates to the water sector, in 2018, when we were preparing for the World Water Forum that was held in Brazil, we did put together a document which was called the Regional Strategic Action Plan for Governance and Building Climate Resilience in the Water Sector in the Caribbean. And we've the acronym RSAP, which is what we've been working on as our action plan. So we moved beyond just having an action plan and to move towards actual implementation of that plan. And a number of things have happened since then. And again, we are now preparing, or just a couple weeks ago, we had the final document presented, which will again be submitted to the World Water Council for the World Water Forum that is going to take place in Bali. But the Caribbean, certainly, we have been doing quite a bit. I noticed that you had somewhere you mentioned about the work you did in Guyana for is trying to get the water policy and the water resource management agency. I think in some countries more than others, for example, in I think St. Lucia has a water resource management agency. In Jamaica, there isn't such an agency exists. And a few countries are moving into that direction. I think in Grenada under the new the G Cruise project, I think they're also trying to establish, albeit it's going to be managed within as a unit within the National Water and Sewage Authority, but there's some good work in progress. And I think the models where you would be able to manage the resource, and then there's also in some countries have already advanced to have an economic regulator. But that helps with the whole management of the resource in the region as we deal with the water scarcity issues.
May I add
Yes,
something
please.
here, Ignatius?
Yes, please.
Okay. Firstly, economic regulation is a tricky one because it's so tied up with politics. And you need to have a neutral body that is able to work on a consensus basis. This was certainly the problem in Trinidad and Tobago. I'd like to say that also regulation is a strange animal. You can have economic regulation, which is about pricing and tariffs, about controlling resource use by tariffs. You can have environmental regulation, and environmental regulation looks at how to protect your environment. You don't dump wastes into the water systems. And then the third form of regulation is called social regulation, which I really find very interesting. This is a process used in Canada, which Valerie will know, that between the law and the courts, there's a series of steps you take. And you if people have an infraction on the regulation, if you take them to court, the court ends up completely blocked up. And my team I had, we introduced this idea into the West Bank, at the Palestine, because there they had two big sewage works being built, and the farmers are taking the olive oil residue and chucking it in the sewers. And as soon as this residue reaches the sewers, because it's filled with phenols, it kills off the activated sludge. So this is what we set up there, a series of steps which persuaded people not to do it. And the mayors, this is called reducing harms. The mayors at a workshop we had, they were very happy with this. They said, yeah, we can use this for parking, drug taking, use of the police. We can use this social regulation approach everywhere. I think some writers call it nudge policies. So I agree. This whole business of regulation is really, it's not easy. How do you get people to follow regulations? And if you take them to the courts, you'll end up blocking up the whole court system. This certainly is the case in the Palestine.
Right. We have a question here from Kevin Carter over in Florida. Over to you, Kevin. You are muted. You seem to be muted, Kevin. I don't know what's happening this afternoon. We are not hearing you.
Maybe he can type it into the chat box.
Yeah, you can put it in the chat box. Yeah. Sorry, Kevin. I don't know what's happening with us this afternoon. So maybe you can just type it in the chat. Right.
I find this thing about social regulation, I haven't heard very much about that, Ignatius. I don't know if you have, but I mean, we looked at economic and environmental. We do talk about social, but I think this is a very interesting concept, tying in what Simon is talking about, that isn't talked about as much.
This is a model which is used in British Columbia. I thought it was very useful. So
yeah,
the problem I had in the Palestine was that I was working with a German company, and they are working, basically they have to get everything approved by the Israelis, and Israelis did not want to hear the term regulation in relation to the Palestinian municipalities, because if you have a regulated municipality, you have a properly managed municipality. And so we had to take the word out of all our reports. So I'm just saying this is the kind of stuff you're in. But Valerie, I'll send you a copy of this material from British Columbia. I found it very, very useful.
yeah, we're fairly progressive here.
Okay. Kevin has written, so can you please discuss some good examples how these interesting frameworks assisted with Global Green Fund or perhaps private sector external funding?
Okay, this is a huge subject. So what I attended an online discussion last week on these very same issues, and there's about 20 different problems that you have to deal with. The most difficult thing was that people, they really don't understand. There's very little information, and it's very difficult to put programs together because the information isn't any good. But Kevin, I will send this to you. In fact, I'll send a copy to Valerie also, and you can see how the thing worked. This based upon a conference held last week. But I will do that. It's so the examples I have from this one here is that it's not easy because there's too much disagreement about what should be prioritized. And it takes years for projects to come on stream based upon this lack of knowledge. I will send that. I will send to Ignatius, yes.
Yeah, sure. We will certainly circulate it among our members once we receive. And of course, the recording will be circulated as well. Yeah, so yes, of course, as I said, our RSAP model, we have the countries have gone beyond just the economic regulation, but as well to do with the trying to as best to regulate certain aspects of the resource management. But of course, as you know, as you indicated, it always presents a challenge. But you must have the framework and the legal legs to stand on for these matters in trying to, and then to be able to do the enforcement.
Yeah, I agree. I worked in many countries in my life, and it always boils down to the law.
Yeah.
The critical factor is having the law and regulations.
Yeah.
Without that, it's very difficult to move. If you have law and regulations, which then apply to the sectors, you can then alter your budgetary process. In many countries of sub-Saharan Africa, for instance, they have these things in the national constitution, but they're not into the sector laws. And if they're not in the sector laws, there's no budget for them. So it's as basic as that.
I don't see any other questions in the chat. If there are any, please, if you have any questions, please share them now with us. Or if you should have further concerns, you can always share the subsequent day.
Well, what I'd like to do, if I may, is we put in this tender with the Water Resources Foundation in the US. Really, it was a long shot. But I'll send that to you also, Ignatius, because we use this methodology of FE and SE. Say, look, in the American cities, it's difficult to get some agreement about where you spend money. And so we said, look, let's let the cities do it themselves. And then they have a formal way that allows them to bypass the state apparatus. So I'll send that to you, Ignatius. You might find it interesting.
Always helpful. As much resource that we have, we can circulate among our partners and always give us a good insight with managing our own issues. Okay.
I think there's a lot to take in here. And there's so much depth in what you're talking about, Simon, that it's difficult, I think, to just to hear it and get your head wrapped around it. That's why I think probably not a lot of questions, because where do you start? It's very interesting to hear all the examples. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, we'd like to thank you very much, Simon. Notwithstanding, we had some difficulties, but I think we made good with the time. And we thank you immensely for sharing your vast experiences and your knowledge with us, which is what this webinar series is all about. And of course, as always, we'd like to thank Valerie Jenkinson of Operators Without Borders for being able to find some good presenters with all the experience that you bring. And we again like to thank all our participants here this afternoon for your patience and understanding, but also for being present. And if it's Wednesday, it's CAWASA Wednesday webinar, where we bring you from A to Z in the water sector, or everything that revolves around water and wastewater. And if you have some time this weekend, you can fly over to St. Lucia. It's the Jazz Festival is on, and where we'll be consuming lots of water as well. So looking forward to seeing some of you. If you're on island, please give me a holler and we will be in touch. So have a good evening, everyone, and keep safe and well.
Ignatius, before you go, can you send me your email number? I don't have an email address.
Yes, I will do that through it. Let me put it in the chat now. I can do that. Otherwise, I can send it via.
I can send it to you as well.
Okay, Valerie, that'll be fine.
Yeah, Valerie will send it to you, but and then I will circulate. All right. Okay, then. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everybody. Have a great weekend. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.